Hello, Brianne. Today, what we want to do is to go through and look at the life of Florence Harding. And this is one of the more difficult of the First Ladies in that her life was so sad and very difficult for her. I believe that many of our First Ladies had difficulty in their lives. That's just the human condition. But I think that she had an extraordinary amount. I think as we go through this lecture, we could draw a very interesting parallel between Mrs. Harding and Mrs. Clinton, with a true difference being in the quality of their upbringing. I believe that Mrs. Clinton had a life of stability, a loving family, and Mrs. Harding did not. Otherwise, there are a lot of comparisons that we could make, but there is certainly a contrast between the two. And you'll see that hopefully as we go on. And I'm going to try to get this video sent to you today um, for you to watch. The good news is we have some delightful First Ladies coming up, Grace Coolidge and Lou Hoover, and you will enjoy both of those. And we can look at Mrs. Harding with a sense of sympathy, mystery, and I think some of the things in her life are just that she had to face were appalling. So hang on and we'll get through this together. Florence was born in August of 1860 and her maiden name was Kling. She grew up in a very difficult home. She had two brothers. Her mother was very quiet and submissive, and you and I understand that those are attributes that as Christian wives we want to cultivate. But I believe that her quietness and her submissiveness came from a fear of a domineering and unkind husband. Florence's father was Amos Kling, was very, very difficult, treated her as if she were a boy, had her doing boy tasks and work in the family business, required that she dress like a boy. It's very unhealthy. Biographer Carl Anthony, rather, who's written a lot on the First Ladies, describes her life as one that was very unspeakably difficult. And Mrs. Mrs. Kling did not stand up to her husband, as according to her biographer, Louisa did not stand up to her husband. Um, and that's hard. That's such a hard situation to look into and judge her for not taking up for her children. We'll see it. We'll see one time when she steps out of her comfort zone. But Florence will become very rebellious against her father, uh, to the point of creating a relationship with a ne'er-do-well neighbor next door, a young man who was sort of the black sheep of his family, and his nickname was Petey, and his real name was Eugene DeWolf. But he was from a decent family, but always in trouble himself. And Florence will initiate a relationship with him to spite her father, and I believe to get out from under his control. Carl Anthony says that she became intentionally pregnant. The two ran away. And here is a bit of mystery. Although there will be a legal document designating a divorce finalization a few years later, it is accepted that they probably were never really married, and that the divorce document was to sort of clean up after the fact to make it look as if they were. And there's no judgment in what I'm saying at all. I'm not being judgmental or criticizing her, but I just want to suggest to you that she was desperate to get out in any way that she could. They have a baby boy that she names Marshall, and uh, Petey will do what many men did back in the day. They just left to go to the store and they never returned. And she, as a matter of fact, this is too much information. I had an uncle on my father's side that did that, and the family was just sure that he had deceased because he was never heard from. And when he decided he wanted to remarry, that's when divorce documents appeared to the wife and family he left behind. And you and I would go, "Oh my goodness, that's terrible." But back in the 50s, it was not unheard of. And that's what, much earlier than that, that is what Petey DeWolf is going to do. He leaves and never returns, and he will turn up one day in a state of morbid alcohol abuse, and he dies eventually from his alcoholism. And there will be a legal divorce for abandonment. And it's just the saddest situation, and it's going to get even more sad. After Petey leaves, Florence really has nowhere to go and no way to sustain herself and her toddler but to return home. So she returns home to her father's, not to her father's house, but to her hometown. And this is Marion, Ohio. She is determined to try to support herself and Marshall. Things are not going well for her. They look, it's embarrassing to her father, and he looks to be just what he is, heartless, father in name only. And so he comes up with a deal. Now, before I tell you that, I want to say to you that Florence's, or Flossie, as she came to be known, Florence's biographer said that this is like the one time that her mother would really step outside of her own safety zone to help Florence, is that she would bring food and money and whatever she could to help Florence, initially unbeknownst to her husband, but then she would just do it in defiance. So, um, what a family dynamic. But rather than continue being looked upon as the cad that he was, Amos will approach his daughter with a deal: is you let me take Marshall and raise him the way he should be raised, and I will help support you, and I will provide for him all that he needs. And according to her biographer, and this makes me very, very sad, is that she goes along with this terrible deal, not so much for Marshall's sake, but for her own. And that makes me sad. That makes me sad. Now, Florence is very talented with music and the piano, and she gives lessons in her home. And one of her students had an older brother, and Flossie is quite taken with him. She encounters him. He plays the trumpet at a skating rink, which was not unusual then. He plays trumpet at a skating rink, and she goes and she hears him, and they strike up a friendship. And the next thing you know, she is Mrs. Harding. So, and this is a very difficult marriage. It is a very difficult marriage. I think that Warren G. Harding is very much like Bill Clinton. Very likable from a humble background. He had powerful friends just because he was so malleable. And you understand what I mean by that? You could he's pliant. You can bend him in any direction. He was considered very handsome and tall, and it's no accident that he is the first president elected by a female franchise. So this is 1920, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. Um, he's the first one to be elected. So by women, with women participating. Now you say, Miss Justice, what's wrong with being likable and being pliant or malleable? Sometimes that can help you get along in the world, and I understand that. But he had poor judgment. I think Marion Flossie represented a questionable judgment, and he also was a pathological womanizer. And there again, we have very much a Clinton-esque value, and it was constant. And when he was in the White House, it was constant. And um, I don't know what triggers a man to be that way. And she felt that she saw something in him that would make him, she thought he could be molded into anything, including into the presidency. And she does it. She does it through the force of her will and her support and his personality. Um, I don't think he was a Rhodes Scholar like Clinton in terms of his great intellect, but I believe that he had some keen political acumen where he knew how to. It's more than shaking hands, but he knew the people to gravitate to and to hitch his post on. And this is how he gets where he is in politics. You know, governor of Ohio, and then eventually president, elected in 1920. Now, let's talk a little bit about how can I say? Let's talk a little bit about her uh, role as first lady. I think she was very much like Julia Dent Grant, in that she loved this role. She loved being in the White House, and she was really one of the first feminists to be in the White House. And she knew there were limits to what, women could do, but she also knew that women had a role, and that women had an increasing role, and that, if somebody can come up from a trumpet player at a skating rink to a newspaper man. He became worked at a family owned newspaper, and then uh, climbed this political ladder rung by rung very quickly. This can happen. Things can happen for women as well. She had, I think, an iron will. She pushed him. She pushed him. I don't think he would have ever had personally that much ambition, but she does. And I think that same is true of Clinton. I think he was affable and likable and had some smarts, as my mother would say. And he is caught by someone with an iron will who realizes they can be a president maker. And Flossie knew she would never be a president, but I believe she felt she could be a power behind the presidency, and make the most of this role as first lady, and a man of mediocrity, and turn him into something else. And the same is true with Hillary. I think Hillary's objectives were a little bit different. I think rather than living vicariously through her husband's success, as Flossie would be forced to do, I think she felt that she could hitch her wagon onto Bill Clinton's, and then thereby carve out her own political future as well. So there's a little bit of difference there too. But I think these women were cut of the same cloth with regard to how they dealt with their husbands, and what they were able to do with their husbands. Florence was an interesting first lady. She wanted the White House open to all sorts of people. She um, this is a time when motion pictures are really underway, and she invites a lot of Hollywood people, and that again makes me think of Mrs. Clinton. She has a lot of Hollywood friends. She tries to hobnob the best she can with people who are in social classes much higher than her own. And she, was very colorful and flamboyant, but I think she was also charming in her way. Unfortunately, in the backdrop, her husband's behavior is infamous, and his administration will become synonymous with corruption. So let's talk just a little bit about this. You can pick up any American history textbook and see that his administration was replete with personal scandals. And when I say personal scandals, I need to be careful how I say that. I think he may have known a little more about some of these scandals than Grant did, but I don't want to go so far as to say that he was a dirty operator. He just surrounded himself with men who I think were yes men, and who were opportunists, and who filled their cabinet positions in such a way as to line their own pockets. And again, that's another lecture. But on the other side of it too, there's a lot of infamy in his personal behavior. He maintained an affair with someone who probably mothered a child between the two of them, Nan Britton. There's terrible stories about them being in the White House together. Unfortunately, that's not limited to the Harding administration. We see a lot of things, terrible things that have come out by honest broker historians about the JFK, the Kennedy White House. So, this isn't the first, it's not the last, but it certainly was a motif of his administration. And I think towards the end of his life that Harding began to feel the weight of the corruption, the political corruption, perhaps his own personal moral collapse. And he had gone on a trip to think things through and possibly come home and confront some of the stories that were beginning to emerge on the pages of the newspapers. He died very, very mysteriously after this trip, and there is so much mystery around his death. We don't know exactly what happened to him. It could have been food poisoning. It could have been some kind of internal aneurysm's not the word I want to use. Internal embolism, but he died very mysteriously, and an autopsy was done. No autopsy was done before he was buried. And immediately upon his death, Flossie began burning all of their personal correspondence. She destroyed almost any kind of written record, any correspondence, any journals, anything like that that she could find. What she also did is she would ask friends, I'm gathering anything that you may have that would provide a remembrance of Warren. Could you send it to me? And once it was sent to her, she burned it. So there was nothing really, any written record. She used this, I want this for the archives. I want this for personal remembrance, to gather as much information as she could. And in doing so, she found out a lot more about his personal scandals, and the bank accounts that he had to create to maintain mistresses and to keep them from talking. So I believe that it was all crashing in on him, and he perhaps was. I don't know if he was going to come clean, or if he was going to confront some of it. I think the understanding is that he was going to deal with some of these political scandals involving members of his administration, and he was going to do that. And she didn't want that to happen. There is a lot of speculation that she, in fact, was responsible for his death, that she may have poisoned him. Now, even though things like that are interesting, I don't like to set my hat on those hooks. But I think you could make a sound historical argument that she was going to do that. She was going to take him out before he ruined his legacy and his reputation. And that's really unfair for me to say that to you. But there is a lot of speculation like that. And I know conspiracy theories are really tricky and they're problematic. And I think the older I get, the more of those I believe. And I think it's supposed to go the other way, isn't it? You're supposed to, as you grow older, you're supposed to grow wiser. And my family and I, we spend a lot of time actually talking about these things as historians. We have 4 people living in the house right now, and all 4 of those people have history degrees. So we talk about these things in light of the historical record, and historical revisionism is not a new thing. Rewriting history. So you might have rewritten a presidential biography so as to protect him. So maybe that was true. I don't know. And now some of it, more of it's come out about Harding. I mean, who knows? I don't mean to ramble on, but Flossie will die the following year in 1924, and she, back home in Marion, I believe that she died financially sound, which if he lived, she probably would not have been. So it's a sad moment in the history of the First Lady. I think that she had a very difficult life that was almost impossible for her to overcome. I don't know anything about her relationship with the Lord. I think she's another that was involved in spiritualism, and I don't mean that in a positive way at all. Spiritualism in the context of the things that were going on with seances and fortune tellers and astrologers and things like that. And that's always, I think, a very bad sign when you see that. It's a sign of someone is not walking um, a biblical path in their lives. So I don't think she had the kind of guidance from either her family or her husband that she needed to have a strong spiritual walk. So I think Flossie is worth a second look. If there's some information that you can find about her in that little First Lady's book that I sent you, you can read what the official stories are. There's several different discussions about his actual cause of death in other sources, so you can see look and see what you find out if you're interested. Um, I I think and gosh, I should go on into Grace Coolidge, but I'll save that for another lecture. But I do want to say that Harding's vice president was a man named John Calvin Coolidge, who was probably one of the most um, moral Christian presidents we've ever had. And he was always outside of the loop of all of these scandals. He was not in on cabinet meetings. He was another one of these vice presidents that was just, oh, hi, Calvin, how are you? And he was not in the inner circle of Harding's political friends, and that served the country very well. And Coolidge was such a good man that when he came into the office, he didn't know a lot of the scandals, and as they began to emerge, he did what he could to try to soften their blow and protect, for the country's sake and for Harding's sake, Harding's reputation. And I'm not saying he was being dishonest, but he tried to smooth things over. I really like. I've come to appreciate President Trump for many things that he did, and I wasn't sure what to make of him initially, but I've come to appreciate him. But I really appreciate Vice President Pence. A gentle, soft, but firm tone, a moral life. And I think we could draw some interesting comparisons between Calvin Coolidge and Mike Pence. So next time when we come back, we'll look at the life of the beautiful Grace Coolidge. You will just really enjoy her, and I hope you'll look. I'm sure in that little book that I sent you, there is a picture of her with her dog Rob Roy in her famous red dress. And I have seen that beautiful dress in the I think I told you about in the First Lady's display at the Jimmy Carter's library. Grace Coolidge, you will love her. A gentle spirit, and their boys or the family was just at the center of their life. And I think you will enjoy that. Lou Hoover was a little bit different, but I love her. And she and Herbert had a very difficult presidency, but I think a successful marriage. So we'll have a good time talking about the two of them. And I will send you this in a message. Tomorrow, on Tuesday, I will be out of pocket for our food distribution until the afternoon. But, if it doesn't interfere with your dinner time with your husband, we can meet at a time after maybe 3-ish, and we can talk about Grace and Lou, maybe, and then answer any questions on how you're doing. And I look forward to that, and I hope you're back in your routine. And I know The summer is passing us by very quickly, but let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Bye, honey.